For the past 12 years, my dog Max has been more than just a pet. He's been my best friend, my emotional support, and my family. I adopted him when he was just a few weeks old, a tiny golden retriever pup with oversized paws and eyes too big for his face. Back then, I was going through one of the toughest patches of my life, fresh out of college, broke, and trying to make sense of adulthood. Max brought a kind of calm I didn't know I needed. As the years passed, Max and I settled into a quiet routine. I bought a modest single-story home in a suburban neighborhood governed by an HOA. The place was quiet, clean, and honestly a bit too picture-perfect at times, but I figured that was part of the charm. Max adapted to the lifestyle immediately. He wasn't a barker or a jumper. He liked to lounge on the front porch, soak up the sun, and occasionally bark once or twice when a squirrel got too close. That was it. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't loud. Just old and content. By the time Max turned 12, his muzzle had turned completely white, and arthritis had slowed him down. We had a ramp installed for the steps out back, and I gave him supplements to ease his joint pain. Despite the physical toll of age, he still wagged his tail like a pup every time I walked through the door. Our life together had become simple and peaceful. And then everything started to unravel. It happened on a warm spring afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea, while Max lay beside me on his dog bed. A white SUV rolled up and stopped in front of my driveway. A tall, impeccably dressed woman stepped out, clipboard in hand and a sour expression already forming on her face. I recognized her immediately. Pamela, the new HOA board president. "Good afternoon," she said in that clipped, overly polite tone that always hinted something unpleasant was about to follow. "I just wanted to let you know we've received a few complaints about your dog." I blinked, completely caught off guard. "Complaints? About Max?" "Yes, noise complaints," she said flatly. "Apparently, there have been multiple reports of excessive barking, mostly in the mornings." I looked down at Max, who was peacefully snoring on the bed. His ears twitched in his sleep. "He hardly barks at all," I replied, confused. "And in the mornings?" "He sleeps in until I wake up for work." "This doesn't make sense." "Well," Pamela continued, flipping through the pages on her clipboard, "we have to investigate all complaints, and we're encouraging you to take immediate steps to address the issue. We don't want to escalate things unnecessarily." That was the first warning sign. The way she said escalate, like it was already a threat. I nodded politely and told her I'd keep an eye on things. She left with a forced smile, and I watched her SUV roll off down the street like a vulture gliding away. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I knew Max. I lived with him. If anything, I'd gotten concerned a few times that he was too quiet for a dog his age. He'd had a few health scares the year before, including a brief bout of pneumonia. For someone to accuse him of being a nuisance felt like a personal attack on everything we'd built together. The next morning, I started doing something I never thought I'd have to do. I began documenting Max's behavior. I set up a motion-detecting security camera near the front porch. I kept logs of his activities, the times he was outside, when he barked, and for how long. It felt absurd, like I was trying to prove the innocence of a creature who still needed help getting upstairs. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. The complaint just didn't fit. My neighbors on either side had always seemed friendly enough. In fact, one of them, Mr. Lopez, was a retired veteran who often came over to scratch Max behind the ears and feed him leftover hot dogs after backyard cookouts. I doubted it came from him. And the couple on the other side were rarely even home, always away on business trips. But suspicion lingered. Days passed, and then weeks. I thought maybe it was over, maybe Pamela's surprise visit was a one-off thing. But deep down, I knew better. With HOAs, things rarely just go away. One morning, I was walking Max around the block when an elderly woman I barely knew stopped me near her mailbox. "Is that the dog people are complaining about?" she asked, frowning. I paused, unsure how to respond. "He's not doing anything wrong. He's just old," She seemed to soften a little. He doesn't seem like a troublemaker. But the HOA's been cracking down lately. They're looking for reasons to hand out violations. I thanked her and walked away, my stomach in knots. It wasn't about Max at all, was it? It was about control. That afternoon, I sat beside Max again on the porch, gently stroking his fur. He wagged his tail but didn't lift his head. The sun warmed his back, and a breeze rustled the trees. It should have been a perfect moment, just me and my loyal companion enjoying a quiet day together. But there was a storm brewing. One I hadn't asked for. One I couldn't understand. And deep down, I knew, we were just getting started. A week after that strange visit from Pamela, I came home from work to find a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. It had that distinct, official look, bold font, stamped HOA logo, and an all-caps heading that read, "Notice of violation, excessive noise from animal on premises." I stood on my porch for a few seconds, completely stunned. Max was asleep just inside the house, curled up in his bed, completely unaware of the drama swirling around him. I opened the envelope and read through the contents, my hands trembling slightly. "This is your first formal violation for reported noise disturbances associated with your pet. Multiple residents have filed complaints indicating that your dog has been barking continuously during early morning hours and throughout the day, causing disruption to the neighborhood's peace and quiet. Please take corrective action within 10 days. Failure to comply may result in additional fines or further action under the community guidelines." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Continuous barking? Disruption? Were we even talking about the same dog? Max had barely barked 5 times in the past week. He slept most of the day. He didn't chase cars. He didn't bark at mailmen. I'd raised him with care and calm. Anyone who lived within 2 houses of me would have known that. So where were these multiple residents coming from? I stormed inside, sat down at my dining table, and pulled up the HOA's online portal. I scanned the community guidelines, looking for anything that could justify this violation. Of course, there it was, Section 8.4. Noise disturbances from animals. It was vague, intentionally so. The rules didn't even define what excessive meant. Just that. Any repetitive or prolonged animal noise that results in community complaints may be subject to disciplinary action. Basically, if someone didn't like your dog, you were out of luck. I went outside, sat on the porch next to Max, and gently ruffled the fur on his head. He looked up at me with tired eyes and let out a long sigh before resting his chin back down. "You're not the problem, buddy," I muttered. "They are." Still, I wanted to play fair. I decided to get ahead of things. The next day, I emailed the HOA board directly and requested a meeting to discuss the complaint. I attached a few days' worth of video footage from my porch camera, showing Max laying around quietly during the times they claimed he was disruptive. I even offered to submit witness statements from neighbors who'd never heard a thing. Pamela responded 2 days later with a single sentence. "Please address the behavior before further action becomes necessary." That's when I knew I was being stonewalled. Out of pure frustration, I called Mr. Lopez next door. He answered on the second ring. "Hey! What's up, neighbor?" he said cheerfully. I asked him straight up if he had heard Max barking during odd hours or being a nuisance. He sounded surprised. "Max? No way," he said. "That dog's quieter than my refrigerator. You know how many dogs bark like crazy around here? You're the last person I'd expect to get a complaint." His words reassured me, but also raised a more unsettling question. If it wasn't him, and it wasn't the couple next door, who exactly was complaining? That weekend I knocked on a few more doors. Politely. Respectfully. Just trying to gather some perspective. Most of the neighbors seemed shocked to hear about the violation. A couple even chuckled at the absurdity of it. But one house, the large 2-story gray one with the manicured hedges and the perpetually closed blinds, refused to answer the door. I'd never even spoken to the people who lived there. I didn't know their names. But something about that silence, that refusal, told me all I needed to know. Later that day, I spotted Pamela's white SUV again, parked just down the street in front of that same gray house. She was standing on the sidewalk, talking to someone just out of my line of sight. I could barely make them out through the trees, but it looked like she was nodding intently, listening, taking notes. And then, just like before, she drove off. That night, as Max and I sat together under the dim porch light, I felt the first flickers of something I hadn't felt since my early 20s, helplessness. The kind that creeps in when you know you're being treated unfairly but have no power to change it. I had done everything right. I followed the rules. I loved my dog. I respected my neighbors. And yet, somehow, I was the one being painted as the problem. The days that followed were tense. Every time Max let out a soft woof, I flinched. I'd gotten paranoid, constantly checking the camera feed, trying to anticipate when the next notice would arrive. I even found myself whispering around the house, as if the walls themselves had ears. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get more surreal, I got a call from the HOA office. "Hello, this is Melanie from the Hillside Grove HOA," said a chipper voice. "We've scheduled a hearing regarding the ongoing complaints against your property. It's mandatory that you attend." "Hearing?" I said, stunned. "What kind of hearing?" "It's a board review meeting to determine appropriate action based on the pattern of complaints. You'll have a chance to speak." "A pattern? This is my first violation." There was a brief pause. "There have been additional informal reports since the initial notice. I'm afraid the board has deemed this a recurring issue." I hung up the phone in disbelief. There wasn't a noise problem. There wasn't a barking problem. There was a problem, but it had nothing to do with Max. I looked at him, peacefully sleeping under the coffee table, snoring softly in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. He'd done nothing wrong. But now, someone wanted him gone. And for the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid I might lose him. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening. I remember because I had to leave work early just to make it. All day I sat at my desk distracted, barely able to focus. Every time I glanced at the clock, my stomach turned. What was supposed to be a normal week had morphed into a battle for my dog's right to simply exist. I arrived at the HOA clubhouse 10 minutes early, wearing a button-down shirt and carrying a folder full of printed evidence, camera screenshots, a written statement from Mr. Lopez, even a noise app report from my phone showing there hadn't been any significant disturbances from my home in the past 2 weeks. The conference room was cold, with that sterile smell of fresh carpet and weak air freshener. 5 people sat at a long table in front of me, the entire board, including Pamela, who greeted me with a polite but empty smile. The other board members barely made eye contact. One of them, an older woman with silver hair and oversized glasses, shuffled papers constantly like she couldn't wait to get out of there. "Thank you for attending, Mr. Harmon," said a man in a navy polo at the center of the table. "Let's begin." I nodded and clutched my folder tightly in my lap. "According to our records," he continued, "you've received 1 formal violation and, based on our logs, 3 additional informal complaints regarding persistent dog barking during early mornings and late afternoons." I tried to hide my frustration. "Respectfully, sir, I'd like to see those logs. Who made these complaints? When? And what's the evidence?" Pamela interjected smoothly. "We're not at liberty to disclose the identities of complainants to protect resident privacy. But we have every reason to believe these reports are credible. They've been consistent. But not accurate," I replied firmly. "I've brought video evidence showing that my dog, Max, hasn't barked excessively, if at all. I even have a signed statement from my next-door neighbor. And sound logs taken at various hours. This dog sleeps more than most people I know." I passed the documents across the table. Pamela glanced at them for half a second before sliding them to the side. "We understand that your dog is elderly and likely docile," she said. "But rules are rules. The integrity of the community depends on enforcing them fairly." Fairly. That word hit me like a slap. There was nothing fair about this. "You're enforcing anonymous complaints," I shot back. "No due process, no investigation, just assumption. This is targeting. Plain and simple. The man in the navy polo cleared his throat. We're not here to debate fairness. The fact remains, repeated concerns have been brought to our attention. And based on this pattern, we are left with no choice but to present you with a resolution. Pamela reached into a folder and pulled out a typed letter. She slid it across the table toward me. I picked it up and read. Effective immediately, you are required to remove the dog from the premises within 14 days. Failure to do so may result in escalating fines, legal action, and potential loss of community privileges. My jaw locked. My pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment, the room went silent except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. You want me to get rid of my dog? I asked, voice shaking. Pamela responded without blinking. We're asking you to remove the source of the ongoing noise disturbance. You may choose to rehome him or temporarily relocate him until a solution is found. He's not a faulty appliance. I snapped. He's my family. Nobody said a word. They just stared. Detached. Bureaucratic. Like this was just another checkbox on their evening agenda. I stood up. You're asking me to abandon a 14-year-old dog who's never hurt anyone, who barely makes a sound, who has no idea why this is happening. You want me to traumatize him because someone thinks he's a nuisance? Pamela folded her hands. This decision isn't personal. It's inhumane, I muttered. Without another word, I grabbed my folder and walked out. The cool evening air hit me like a wave, and I took several deep breaths to stop myself from breaking down right there on the clubhouse steps. Max was waiting for me at home. Blissfully unaware. Still trusting that I'd protect him. But I had 14 days. 14 days to figure out a way to fight this, or give in and say goodbye to the only companion I'd had for over a decade. Back home, Max greeted me like he always did, with a slow wag of the tail and a soft grunt as he rose to his feet. I knelt down and hugged him tightly. They want to take you away from me, I whispered. He nuzzled my arm gently, resting his head there like he could sense the tension. I spent the next few hours making calls. First, to a local animal rights attorney. Then to the county's animal control office to see if any noise complaints had been filed formally. They hadn't. Which told me even more, these complaints were only happening within the HOA. Probably by the same person. Over and over again. I also posted in a local neighborhood app, asking if anyone had experience with unjust HOA pet rules. The replies poured in, stories of cats banned from windowsills, service animals questioned, dogs reported for merely being seen on balconies. Apparently, I wasn't alone. One private message stood out. A woman named Denise, who lived 3 blocks away, told me she'd once been harassed by Pamela too, after her kid's wheelchair ramp was deemed aesthetic clutter. She'd fought back and won, with media attention. Get eyes on them, she wrote. They only play dirty when no one's looking. That gave me an idea. The next morning, I called in a favor from a journalist friend I'd known in college. I explained the situation, how an elderly, quiet dog was being forced out of his home due to anonymous noise complaints, and how the HOA refused to disclose anything or consider evidence. He said, "That's outrageous, and exactly the kind of human story people click on. I'll get back to you." By noon, he emailed me. "We're interested. But I need a face. You okay being public?" I stared at Max, peacefully sleeping in a sunbeam on the living room rug. His ears twitched slightly in his dreams. I knew what I had to do. "Yes," I replied. "Let's do it." The day after agreeing to go public, my house felt like it had transformed into a war room. I was no longer just trying to keep Max. I was determined to uncover exactly who was behind the campaign against him, and more importantly, why. I had a sinking feeling this wasn't about a barking dog. It was about power, control, or maybe even revenge. I needed to dig deeper. The first thing I did was revisit all of the complaints I had access to. The formal violation, which I'd been mailed weeks earlier, had no specific details, just a general statement about disturbing barking during unspecified times. The follow-up letters were even more vague. It all felt flimsy. I called up Mr. Lopez and asked if he'd be okay with me recording a video of him explaining that he never heard any disruptive barking from Max. He agreed immediately. "That dog's quieter than a goldfish," he joked as I filmed him on his porch. "I hear more noise from Pamela's weekly book club nights, and I'm pretty sure those aren't about books." I laughed, but something clicked. Pamela. She was way too involved in this situation for it to be just another HOA concern. She showed up at every interaction. She pushed the issue at the hearing. She dismissed the evidence. And now I was hearing that her parties were more disruptive than Max ever was? Something wasn't adding up. Back at home, I reviewed security cam footage from the last month. I wasn't expecting much, but around 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday 2 weeks ago, I caught something strange. A woman walking past my house, Pamela. She was holding her phone out, hovering near my property. She paused near my living room window and muttered something before walking away. Then again, 2 days later. Same thing. Early morning. Phone out. Paused in front of my house. She was recording. I pulled up audio clips from my doorbell cam. Sure enough, in one of them, I heard faint barking, but it wasn't Max. It was high-pitched and distant, and it only lasted 5 seconds. I checked the timestamps. Pamela had passed by seconds before the barking began. It came from behind her. Probably from one of the other houses on the next block. She was manufacturing evidence. Or worse, using audio from other dogs to claim Max was the problem. Fueled by anger, I decided it was time to visit someone who might know more, Denise, the woman who messaged me about her run-in with Pamela. She welcomed me over without hesitation. As we sat in her kitchen, she told me everything. "Pamela's been like this since she got voted in 2 years ago," she said. "She uses her position to bully people she doesn't like. If you stand up to her or challenge her in meetings, you're suddenly a violator." Denise had gone through it when she installed a temporary wheelchair ramp for her son. She told me it ruined the neighborhood charm. It took her threatening legal action and calling a local news outlet before the board backed off. "But here's the kicker," Denise said, lowering her voice. "Pamela hates dogs. She had a feud with someone last year over their German Shepherd. Said it triggered her anxiety just seeing it in the park. She tried to ban all dogs over 40 pounds from common areas." That explained a lot. So this wasn't about noise. It wasn't about complaints. It was about Pamela's personal bias. Max didn't stand a chance because Pamela didn't want him here to begin with. Armed with that knowledge, I decided to dig even deeper. I reached out to another neighbor who used to be on the board, Richard, a kind but no-nonsense retired police officer. I'd seen him walking his bulldog around the block dozens of times. He agreed to meet and talk off the record. "You want to know the truth?" he said, sipping from a black coffee mug. "Pamela's been abusing her position since day one. Funneling contracts to her brother's landscaping business. Enforcing rules on some, turning a blind eye on others. She'll use anything to force people out if they don't fall in line." When I brought up the complaints against Max, Richard shook his head. "That's all her. Most people don't even care about dogs barking unless it's 2 a.m. or something extreme. Max? He's quieter than my old toaster." I asked if there was any way to formally challenge her or request a public review of her conduct. "You could push for a recall vote," he said. "But it's messy. Takes signatures, and she has friends on the board. You'd need to rally people." Rally people. That gave me another idea. I went home and put together a flyer, a single-page sheet explaining what was happening to Max, how Pamela had used her authority to issue an ultimatum based on flimsy, likely falsified evidence, and how this was a larger issue of HOA abuse. I included a QR code linking to a short video I'd made with Mr. Lopez's testimony, camera clips, and screenshots. Then I printed out 50 copies. That evening, I went door to door, leaving a flyer at every house on my street, and several on the next block. A few neighbors were home and asked questions. I explained everything, calmly but passionately. To my surprise, many were sympathetic. Some had their own horror stories about Pamela. Others didn't know this was even happening. One man down the street offered to help me distribute more flyers. The next day, the local journalist I'd spoken to finally called me back. "We're running your story online tomorrow morning," he said. "And our social media team is putting together a short reel using the footage you sent." I didn't know whether to cry or shout with joy. By the time sunset rolled around, I already had half a dozen new messages on the neighborhood app. People were outraged. One user posted, "I saw the video. That poor dog didn't do anything. This is disgusting." Another said, "Time to start a petition to get Pamela out of there." I wasn't just fighting back anymore. I was gaining allies. As I sat on the porch with Max lying peacefully beside me, I watched neighbors walk by, wave, and smile. A few even stopped to pet him and tell him they were on his side. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. But I also knew Pamela wouldn't go down without a fight. The morning the article dropped, everything changed. The headline read, "Local HOA forces senior to get rid of elderly dog based on dubious complaints." And right underneath it was a photo of me and Max on our front porch, with his gray muzzle resting against my knee. The article detailed everything: the lack of proof, Pamela's history of bias, the testimonies from neighbors, and even included clips from my security footage. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. The neighborhood message board blew up first. "This is absolutely disgusting. That poor man and his dog. I've lived next to him for years. His dog doesn't make a peep. Shame on this HOA. Pamela needs to resign. Period." People I'd never even spoken to before were suddenly knocking on my door to offer support. Someone left a bouquet of flowers with a note that said, "We're with you. Max deserves to stay." I was overwhelmed, in the best way. By noon, a local news van parked at the corner of the street. A reporter asked if I'd be willing to go on camera for a follow-up segment. I agreed, and this time I didn't hold back. I told the whole story, start to finish, from the absurd complaint to Pamela's personal crusade to get rid of Max. I ended the interview with one sentence. "Max is my family, and I'm not going anywhere without him." The story aired that evening. That's when things really escalated. At the next HOA meeting, which usually drew a sleepy crowd of a dozen residents, we had over 100 people show up. Some had to stand outside. I saw signs that read, "Let Max stay. Stop HOA bullying. Justice for our neighbors." Pamela walked in like she was still in control, clipboard in hand, trying to act unbothered. But you could see the cracks forming. She avoided eye contact. She didn't smile. She looked like a CEO walking into a hostile shareholder meeting. I was asked to speak first. I walked up to the mic and scanned the room. All those faces, people who believed me. People who cared. I cleared my throat and said, "What happened to Max is more than just an abuse of power. It's about a culture of intimidation. A system that allows one person to weaponize rules against anyone they don't like. And it stops now." Applause broke out before I could even continue. One by one, my neighbors took the floor. Mr. Lopez came forward and said, "This man's dog never bothered a soul. But Pamela's been bothering this neighborhood for years." Denise stood and gave a heartfelt speech about her own struggles, calling out Pamela's cruelty and double standards. Even Richard, the former board member, spoke up. "I've seen Pamela bend the rules to suit herself. It's time we held her accountable." The room was electric. Pamela finally tried to speak. "This meeting is not a trial," she said, her voice strained. "We have procedures, and everything that's been done was within the HOA's rights." Someone shouted from the back, "Then your rights are broken." She tried to regain control, but it was clear she'd lost the room. A petition was brought forward that night, signed by over 80 residents, calling for Pamela's immediate removal as HOA president. According to our bylaws, it was more than enough to trigger a special vote within 10 days. Pamela, cornered and humiliated, stood silent. The very next morning, she submitted her resignation. And just like that, the queen of the HOA throne was dethroned. But that wasn't the end. The board met without Pamela for the first time in 2 years, and one of the first motions passed, unanimously, was to rescind the order requiring me to give up Max. They apologized, formally and publicly, and offered to review every complaint Pamela had issued in the last 12 months. Justice. Max, blissfully unaware of the political revolution he had inspired, celebrated by chasing his old tennis ball in the yard, tail wagging like he was a puppy again. The neighborhood felt different now. Lighter. Kinder. People waved more. Stopped to talk. Asked how Max was doing. Kids would even come by to pet him after school. Someone started a group called Neighbors for Fair HOAs to keep the board in check going forward. As for me, I started sleeping again. Eating better. Smiling more. And I realized something. This whole ordeal, while awful and draining, reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. That we're never truly powerless when we speak up. Max wasn't just my dog. He was a symbol. Of decency. Of quiet resistance. Of love in a world that sometimes forgets how to show it. And for the rest of his days I made sure he knew just how loved he really was. Because he wasn't just worth fighting for, he was worth everything.